Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm John Hendriks, and this week our guest is Lynne Anderson, a natural family planning educator. Welcome, Lynne.
Thanks very much, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming. Now, Lynne, would you like to tell us a little bit about you personally, please?
Oh, goodness, that's a big question. I'm married. I have 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. They're all grown now. The oldest is 31 and the youngest is 21. No grandchildren yet, unfortunately. Only one of them is married, so I'll have to bide my time and be patient. I'm not a very interesting person. I like to travel. I like to read. Love music and theatre. In fact, I'm a bit of a frustrated performer at times. But all in all, I'm quite happy with my life.
Sounds like a pretty full life too. It's busy and...
Not as full as it could be. I tend to be a bit lazy sometimes, but full enough for me.
Yes, I appreciate you sharing that with us. And can you tell us a little bit about your role with Billings Life?
Yes, well, at the moment, as you said in your introduction, I'm a senior teacher of the Billings ovulation method, and that involves, we're basically a teaching organisation. So we train and accredit teachers of the Billings ovulation method, which is one method of natural family planning, of which there are many. And as we train the teachers, we also then those teachers train couples or women about how to manage their fertility without drugs or devices. And as an offshoot of that work, there are a couple of other things I'm also involved in, and one is sexuality education and relationships education in secondary schools. And one of the other things we do is we're accredited with the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners to offer continuing medical education for doctors. So we actually put on seminars for doctors and other allied health professionals, midwives, nurses, that type of thing, naturopaths. And the professionals can earn their professional points for coming to our seminars. So I do a little bit of all of those things. And if I'm really lucky, sometimes I get to teach overseas, which is an added bonus because Billings Life is the Australian organisation of the Billings method, but we have a worldwide organisation too. And because the headquarters of the method is here in Melbourne, the teachers in Melbourne are the ones who tend to go overseas and teach overseas. So I've been lucky enough to do that a couple of times.
Okay, that's terrific. It must be a privilege to be able to, teach other people about what you do. And
it is, because it's astounding, really, that in this day and age, when we live in the information age, and all we've got to do, everybody's got a laptop, everybody's got a phone, and yet people can be so ignorant about what's closest to them, which is their own bodies, and so it's really fascinating. If I hadn't been doing this in another life, I would have been a nurse or a doctor or whatever. I've always been interested in biology. And that's just been the perfect marriage with being able to do this. So you get to meet a lot of people, you get to use your intellect, you get to teach other people about something that's important and personal to them. And it can be very, very personal when you're teaching a couple. A couple who may have been trying for many, many years unsuccessfully to have that longed-for baby, and they allow you into their private life to help them achieve that goal. And when you can do that with them, it's the most rewarding experience.
It must be, especially, as you said, getting that phone call of the pregnancy.
Exactly. You watch things happening and unfolding with them, and then you finally one day get that call that says we're pregnant, and it's just the most amazing feeling, and it really is why I think I could speak for most teachers. That's why we do the job.
Yeah,
it's one of the greatest moments in our work.
Absolutely. Are you able to tell us when you started? How long have you been part of the Billings Life program?
Oh, well, I first started in 1984, and I didn't start on the natural family planning side of things. I actually started as a facilitator in our schools program, the Loving for Life program, as it's called now. It wasn't called that in those days. So that's how I became involved with the organisation. And my husband and I had always used natural family planning. When we married, we didn't want to use any chemical contraceptives. And we had ethical issues. Being Catholic, we wanted to, as much as we could, abide by the Church's teaching. So we were using a natural method at that point. And as I became involved with the schools program, I realised we were using the symptothermal method at that time, and I realised they're not talking about taking temperature anymore. Something's changed. So then I realised that the Billings method was something separate, and that we didn't use thermometers anymore. It was based purely around the woman's observations of her cervical mucus. And so I became interested to know more about exactly how that worked. And after, I think, working for about 10 years in the schools program, somebody said to me, "Why haven't you ever become a teacher?" And I said, "Oh, I suppose because nobody asked." So they said, "Well, let's fix that." So that's when I started doing my teacher training and became accredited as a teacher. And I think I've been an accredited teacher now for about 18 years, something along those lines.
Excellent.
So it's been a long while.
It has been a long while, 18 years. There must be a lot of interesting stories to come out of that. And
yes.
On that note, we're going to take a break, Lynne, and be back. You're watching Support Life. Please join us straight after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm John Hendriks, and our guest today is Lynne Anderson. Lynne, just before the break, you were talking about you've been in the teaching business and the Billings Life for 18 years.
That's right.
And I wanted to ask you, can you think of any special experience that stands out in your mind in that time that you may want to share with us?
Oh, goodness, now you've caught me on the hop. I think probably, yes, I do actually. I was mentioning earlier that occasionally we're lucky enough to be invited to teach overseas, and another teacher and I went to Timor-Leste several years ago, and the Dilasel brothers we were staying with while we were there. They're doing wonderful work in Timor-Leste. And so we ran 2 training programs, one in Dili and one in Bacau. And the people were just wonderful. We were looked after a treat, but there were some funny stories from that trip as well, as there always are with any of the teachers who travel, and they've travelled to Pakistan, they've travelled to India, they've travelled to Vietnam and South America and Mexico and all over the place, Africa, a lot of third world countries, because natural family planning is one of those things that is cost free to people. You don't need to have access to a doctor or a chemist to be able to use this. It's simply knowledge, and women can keep charts in many ways. In fact, one of our teachers tells the story of a woman in Pakistan who used to keep her daily chart by using the ash from her fireplace. And the ash could be of different colours. It could be charcoal, it could be almost white, it could be grey. And each day she would use the ash and just put a mark on the hearth with her finger. And then at the end of the cycle, she'd just wipe it all out again and start again.
It's easy, but it works.
This is the thing, as long as a woman can keep a record, no matter how she keeps it. Another story from some of the Pacific Islands involves women using vines to which they attach twigs to denote days of infertility. and green sprouts, shoots, to donate days of fertility.
Makes sense.
On the day they believe they're ovulating, most of the women wear hibiscus in their hair, so they take the biggest hibiscus they can find and they knot that on the vine for the day of ovulation. And all of this hangs on the lintel of the house, so that as the husband comes home, he knows what the state of proceedings is. The only negative is the whole village knows what the state of proceedings is. But those sorts of trips overseas are always a wonderful source of joy and fun and positivity. So I think that's probably the highlight for me.
Yes, thank you for sharing that with us. And we don't need elaborate, extensive technology to be able to track these things.
No.
It's just simply your body and the mechanism in which you use to track it.
And tuning into it.
Tuning, yeah. And
listening to it.
And tuning is a good thing, isn't it? To be tuned in with our body. I'd like to ask you how you got involved with the pro-life movement. I know the Billings is not essentially your typical pro-life movement, but being a pro-life show, we're going to ask you that.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, as I said, the way I came into it was through education for adolescents. And part of that program was very pro-life. We talked about unplanned pregnancy, and that was one of the issues we covered with young people when we talked about sexuality and sexual activity. And from that whole ethos that underpinned that program is the same ethos that underpins the foundations of the Billings ovulation method. And so it wasn't a very difficult shift to move from one to the other. And we're very fortunate, I suppose, in the sense that we don't necessarily have to deal with the very negative aspects of unplanned pregnancy. We're more involved with helping couples before the pregnancy even takes place.
Yes.
But for couples who have a philosophical objection to methods of family planning that might be abortifacient, then the natural methods are an obvious alternative that fits in with their perhaps pro-life philosophy. It might just be that they want a healthier alternative than chemical methods of contraception. But for those who have a real ethical problem with contraceptives, this is a perfect alternative for those couples.
So it covers moral, as you said, education, obviously religion, of course, and pro-women.
Very much pro-women, pro-marriage.
Pro-marriage.
Pro-life.
Pro-life, of course. And the most exciting one is couples having difficulty getting pregnant. So you're able to, they understand when pregnancy can occur, when the conception.
Exactly. We did a very interesting study for many years. The method was originally developed for couples wanting to avoid a pregnancy. But of course, if you know when you're fertile, you automatically also know when you're not fertile. And so it became, as well as a method for couples trying to morally or ethically avoid pregnancy, it also was immediately able to be used in the reverse when a couple came to the point where they did want to have a family or they wanted another baby. Then, of course, the method could simply be reversed, and instead of abstaining when you were fertile, you had intercourse when you were fertile. So it's a perfect partnership, and it can be used through all stages of a woman's reproductive life. She doesn't have to be in regular cycles. She can use it when she's subfertile to optimise her fertility. She can use it when she's in normal, healthy, fertile cycles to avoid or achieve pregnancy. She can use it when she's breastfeeding, when she's waiting for the return of her fertility after childbirth. So it's a very, very flexible method, and once a woman learns it, she can use it in any of those situations. But there was another point I was going to make, and it slipped right out the back of my brain,
That's
John.
okay, because you'll have the opportunity to think through that during the course of our break, which we need to go to.
Thank you.
You're watching Support Life. We will be back straight after this break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm John Hendriks and our guest is Lynne Anderson. Now, Lynne, just before the break, you had a thought, and I think we were speaking that it was, perhaps you could explain the cultural and religious advantages to the Billings method.
Okay, well, John Billings always, when in the very early days of the method, of course, he was criticised because being a Catholic doctor, and at the time the church being so openly critical of contraception, it was thought that this sort of natural method was second-rate anyway and only for Catholics. And John used to reply by saying, well, there's no such thing as Catholic ovaries. So women have the same ovaries whether they're Catholic, Buddhist, Calathumpian, whatever they are, their body functions in exactly the same way. And that's one of the beauties of any natural method, but particularly the Billings ovulation method, because it's applicable to people of all cultures, all faiths, or no faith at all, because we're not asking women to do anything that is immoral or could be construed as negative. All we're asking them to do is understand their own bodies, and that's a very empowering thing.
Absolutely.
A woman knows that.
It makes perfect logical sense as well, doesn't it? So you briefly touched on the history of the Billings, John Billing, obviously. When did it sort of start and how did it sort of come about to become popular?
Yeah, well, John Billings was a Catholic doctor. He was a neurologist, and his wife Lynne was a paediatrician. They were happily married with 8 children, the last of whom was adopted. And John was approached by Father Maurice Katarinich, who was a Catholic priest who was involved in marriage counselling at the time. He'd been asked by Archbishop Daniel Mannix to actually begin the first, what now is Catholic care or centre care. He was asked to start that Catholic service. And he had come across a number of couples whose marriages were in serious jeopardy because all that the couples who wanted to follow church teaching had to use to plan their families was the rhythm method. And the rhythm method was only suitable for women who had extremely regular cycles. And if a woman couldn't use the rhythm method, well then the only way to prevent a pregnancy was to not have any sort of marital relations at all. And so you could see that would put a great strain on the marriage. So he asked John, knowing that John was a happily married man with a large family of his own, he asked him to help. He was certain, he was a man of great faith, Father Cat, and he said, I'm sure God wouldn't leave people without an answer. There must be an answer, we just have to find it. So John's response, well, thanks for the vote of faith, but I'm not an obstetrician or a gynaecologist, I'm a neurologist. But he said, I'll give 3 months to the work and I'll do some research through all the medical literature and see what I can find. And in that 3 months, that'll give you time to find somebody who's better equipped to do the work. Well, that was in 1953. And John died in, I think it was 2005, and up until a couple of years before his death, he was still actively involved in the work. So it was 60 years.
Wow.
The 3 months turned into 60
amazing.
years. And in the course of that, his wife Lynne also became involved.
Fantastic. Well,
yeah, and Melbourne should be very proud of them. They were both Melburnians. She was Dux of St Michael's Anglican College, and John was Dux of Xavier, and they lived and raised their family here in Melbourne in Kew. So we're very proud of them.
Now we're going to ask you the $1 million question. Explain the Billings method to us.
Well, I brought along my little trusty slide rule here. This is a fantastic teaching tool that we use. It's visual and it's very, very easy to remember. And basically what we know is that men are fertile all of the time. That's the first thing we have to remember. So they're the status quo. Nothing changes for men. But women's fertility is switched on and off each cycle. So what we have to do is identify the small window where she's fertile. It's only about a week at most, because that's the only time that intercourse will lead to a pregnancy, is during that window. So it's how do we identify that window? And the different methods of natural family planning use different ways of identifying the window. Now, the Billings ovulation method uses the woman's observations of the mucus that's produced at the cervix. So there are little crypts in the cervix that produce different types of mucus under the influence of hormones. So as her hormone levels change during her cycle, so the mucus changes. So when she's infertile, her cervix is blocked. Nothing can get in. that's because we don't want infection to get in, but also sperm can't get in. So that's the time when she's infertile. So all women know when they menstruate, and that's represented by the red here on my little slide rule. Now, usually, if the cycle's about a month long, usually there'll be a few days following menstruation where the woman is infertile. In other words, the brain hasn't yet sent the message to turn her fertility on. Her ovaries are at rest and nothing's happening. And this is the time when intercourse can be had without pregnancy resulting. But at some point, the brain's going to switch fertility on. And when that happens, the mucus changes. Now, the way the woman senses this mucus is she just... men who are watching won't understand this, but the women will know what I'm talking about. The woman just has to tune into how she feels at the vulva as she walks around doing the normal things she does every day. She doesn't have to go looking for anything. She doesn't have to touch anything. Just has to think, how am I feeling? And by keeping a daily record of that, she will see these patterns where some days the mucus is very little or absent, and it's the same day after day after day. That's infertility. And then she'll notice another stage at which the mucus is more copious, more fluid. It produces a different sensation, and the sensations become gradually more and more lubricative over a few days. Once that lubricative sensation disappears, she knows that she's just about bang on the time of ovulation. And it takes either can take 2 or 3 days for not for ovulation to occur, but we can't pinpoint exactly the day of ovulation, but we know down to 3 days where it will occur. And then once the egg's been released and we allow 24 hours for it to die, for the rest of the cycle the woman's infertile again, because she'll only ovulate once in a cycle. And once she's seen it happen, it can't happen again. Her body recognises she's not pregnant, she bleeds again, and the whole process starts again. So these 4 phases, menstruation, infertility, fertility, infertility, are repeated in each cycle. Some women who have really short cycles might only have a day of infertility here. Or sometimes if it's a really short cycle, they won't have any infertility. If they've got really long cycles, they'll have more days of fertility. So this is the part of the cycle that varies. But once you ovulate, it's always about 2 weeks till the next bleed.
Now, it's very, very interesting. Now, if they would like some more information, they can go to your website, which is?
They certainly can. Our web address is www.thebillingsovulationmethod.org. And we have a 1-800 number which they can find on the website. They're welcome to ring us here in Melbourne and we can put them in touch with their closest teacher.
Thank you so much for coming today and informing us. I'm delighted to have you and hope to see you again. You've been watching Support Life. Please join us again next week. Goodbye.